All right. So the first two items on our agenda have the applicants have requested to continue them.
Yep. I am noticing a typo on those. That should be January 2025.
Oh,
yes.
yeah.
What's it?
So this is 348 Main Street and Harold Avenue, those two. I've got a different agenda than CPW. Do you want a motion?
Yeah, I was just looking through the requests and see if there's anything in there that needs to actually be read into the record, but it's just a simple request to continue. So
Okay, and I think, let's see, Harold, was that to the,
Main Street is first.
Yeah.
let's see, I just need to make sure, let's see. 13th, is it 13th? Let me just make sure here. Yes. I'll move separately. I'm going to go a little out of order here. I'll move that we continue the Harold Avenue, Harold Avenue until Monday, January 13th.
Second.
all right. So roll call vote. John?
Yes.
John? Yes. Tom?
Yes.
All right.
And then, let's see, I'll move that we continue the 348 Main Street matter to January 13th of 2025.
I second that motion.
All right. Again, roll call, Lorena. John?
Yes.
John, yes. Tom?
Yes.
All right. Okay. All right. That's the end of our scheduled scheduled agenda. And so we have a number of items, planning updates and other topics. So Andrew, if you want to take whatever.
Sure thing. I'll
think
try to
is-
go right down the list here. So the Farmhouse Lane subdivision, which is right off of 103 Sanborn Street up on the northern part of town, has substantially completed the subdivision work to date. Thus, they are requesting a reduction in their bond that's being held between the tri-party agreement with the town, the bank, and the developer. I believe the bond currently sat at just about $212,000. What we found on our inspection was that the work was substantially complete, and thus it is quite a major reduction proposed of about 196,000, just over such, which will leave just over 19,000 left in the bond itself. The reasons for the remaining hold on the bond was at the time of our inspection, some of the bound work, the granite bound work, wasn't satisfactory. So we went back and forth on some corrections with the developer. They've since looked to complete those corrections, get the bounds at grade level, correct their mistakes that we had noted. But at the time when we wrote this, it just wasn't done yet. So we got them to agree that this partial reduction is supported on their end rather than the full. But in all likelihood, in the next month or two, they could very well wrap up that whole process. So, but in terms of this, it's just the Form M for that bond reduction, again, down to 19,195, and this is a private way, and we expect it to be finished soon. So,
Are the cost estimates, well, let me ask three questions. Are the cost estimates acceptable to engineering?
Yep.
Are the cost estimates based on the cost for the town to do the work?
both answers are yes.
And is it a cash bank-held CD or something like that, as opposed to an insurance carrier.
Correct. The bank holds the funding, is my understanding, and the developer and us have the tri-party, and so it needs all parties to agree.
Okay. The reason why I ask those questions, I've had an extremely bad experience where ultimately they went into bankruptcy and we were kind of barred because of some legislation that was passed prohibiting us from going forward. But
Nope, this has been established for about every subdivision to date in Reading in the tri-party agreement process, and again, that's if the developer happened to walk away and the town was ultimately responsible to finish the work. That's why it's set at the cost for the town to pay the wages and do the work necessary.
okay.
That's at 100% level of the work?
Yep.
So the 196 was the full scope of the original work if the town did it.
Oh, sorry. The original scope was about 212,000. This is probably about a 95% reduction or so.
I see, but the 212 would have covered the entirety of that work.
Correct.
The town did it.
Yep.
So the town actually assesses what its risk profile is in any of these projects and comes up with a rough order magnitude for.
Yeah, so we'll run estimates on linear feet of pavement or concrete, estimates on landscape and so on. What you'll see most often, and in this case too, was the development will complete the road almost substantially besides top course and then seek building permitting, which triggers the bond, and it saves them on their end from a much higher bond because the road work is substantially complete. But ultimately, we still estimate on the safe side to ensure that the work is done to the standard expected.
And just to, Tom asked this question, I'll ask it a different way. This is a warranty bond with the bank, so essentially it's a line of credit where the developer's paying the interest, but it becomes due immediately if there's a default. Is that the way it goes?
That's my general understanding.
Okay. You also said the work. The reason, one of the justifications to reduce this was the work was substantially complete. I may be misquoting you, but I got the impression that that's what you said.
The entire site development is substantially complete, but the road work, utility, and everything except the bounds and as-built were satisfactory.
So this is only the portion that's unsatisfactory and everything else is totally complete. Is that right? Thank you.
Correct.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Yep.
My only concern would be that I know it's laid out on a sheet of paper as to how much goes for each one. I wouldn't want them to complete half. I'd want the full amount outstanding until the entire thing is completed. Now they could come in again and do the same thing if they wanted to, but I don't want us to get down to.
Yeah, I mean, the partial reduction is fairly common in many cases.
Well, I have no problem with the partial reduction.
I understand your point. You want to lever to make sure it gets done.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you got it.
Right, I think
So-
that if they just did everything and left the as-bills,
Mhm.
the town would never see the as-bills. And 100% agree, I wouldn't agree to reducing it just so the as-bills are left.
Right.
Because we that's like a classic
Yeah.
thing
we
that they
ran
just don't
through
want to
the-
do and they would rather just walk away.
Yeah, and we ran through the same of we're holding all of the bounds, right? We're not going to go for one bound and a cost, right? We're going to hold the percentage for all of them
Yeah.
because we're not interested
Right.
in this piece game of
Right.
7 out of 8 are done or 3 out of 4.
Right.
So we're going to hold.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is this body amenable or is it within our purview to alter the amount, the suggested amount? If we follow Tom's suggestion and say, it wasn't a mathematical exercise, but we recognize substantial work had been done and say, reduced it by 80% rather than the 95 for the sake of an example. Is that within the purview of this body?
Yeah.
I'll say in my time, we've never done that. We have not agreed to reduce
Mm-hmm.
and asked for more time or more substantiation or more something, but we've never got into the let's change this or change that. My understanding is, right, there is a bit of back and forth before it comes to us, between
I see.
engineering and the developer. Maybe I have
Yeah.
that correct,
No, you're
incorrect, but that
correct.
was my understanding.
And that was going to be my note. We've not accepted a partial reduction, but we've never changed the number. I don't think, because if you wanted to hold more, you would either request to hold the full, or if you want to change this number, we'd have to go line by line and find what's not satisfactory and needs to be held still so that we could hold that specific funding line.
It sounds like all the trades have been done before it gets to us. Where those negotiations have occurred between the developer?
Engineering,
Who? You?
engineering, planning, and the developer. Yep.
Okay. I guess it's more a question, philosophical question. I think at the end of the day, we're talking about fairly modest amounts of money here. It's not a big deal, but just in principle, would you hold, say, 20% back until the project was completed rather than whatever the actual calculation said? I have no problem sticking with this because it sounds like it's standard practice.
The actual calculations get me a little bit nervous that, let's say somebody completes the sidewalk and then goes belly up. I want to go after the entire 19 in case the others, we got a shortfall.
In other words, you don't cave in the rest of the 5 till it's all done.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just wanted to make it clear.
There's a bucket where, like trying to get below that, it doesn't even make sense for anyone to mobilize in the hassle.
Yeah, okay, I got it.
Yeah.
You need a motion here to accept or?
It would be a motion to endorse, I believe, the Form M as presented.
So the answer to your question is yes, but the motion would be a motion to endorse.
To make a motion to endorse the subdivision Form M on behalf, titled Chimney Hill Definitive Subdivision of Land Running Mass, dated Feb. 3, 2021.
Sounds good.
Following the town engineer's recommended reduction of $196,198.48 for a net amount of remaining of $19,195.00.
I'll second.
All right. Roll call vote. John?
Yes.
John, yes. Tom?
Yes.
All right.
By the way, I appreciate the group's willingness to answer silly questions about how we do things.
Absolutely.
So some of this stuff is still new, so.
These things only come every so often.
Yeah.
So.
And we do have one, and since we're in the planning and other topics, maybe this is the appropriate time to just bring it up. We do have one, right, where I think it's about trees. I forget what.
Yep.
I know where the road is, but I don't remember what the name is. Yep. It's up off of Main Street, right, where I know that's been a ongoing concern. And just wondering if right now is not the time to plant trees. So obviously nothing's going to happen until the spring, but I don't know if you've had any further discussion on.
It's been admittedly, which is where the thoughts of, I think in the past, how we got work done was, right, a hearing to potentially pull the bond. And that seemed to entice the developer to come back and complete some work that was expected. So the thoughts are evolving on if we need to perform a similar practice to get them back. But yes, right, like spring is the planting season now. And so they've been in discussion, but not enough to actually feel confident that this work is being completed sooner than later. So it comes down to the trees, the bounds again in the as-built, but there's enough held that, if we really wanted to pull a bond for that work, or alternatively some sort of acceptance of the road as a public way, and the town to ask for like some sort of deposit or other to finish the work. So we're working through some of those options to get them back to finish that up.
I guess I would just expect that progress be made on that in the spring, and if not, that we should be talking, come late spring, that that it would come back to this this body to make a decision to to
Make note of
pull
that.
the bond.
Full agree. So in a
It-
similar.
that one has been a long time,
It has
like
been too
beyond,
long,
yeah,
yeah.
it's been beyond long, so.
Yeah. On a similar topic, the Grandview Road Extension Subdivision Form H and Form L that we expected was to set a bond and tri-party agreement. Upon inspection of the site, we felt that this site wasn't ready and needs a lot of work to do before we have those discussions and look at any type of building permitting. So we need a lot of clarifications from that development on their schedule and what it is they're trying to bond and hold. So it was not kept very well at that site, and again needs a lot of work to correct and make safe and make sure that it is good to go forward. So
We had a question from the public.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tony DeRezzo, 130 John Street. Has there been any discussions with the developer about the grading that was done on town property for the subdivision road?
So that's another piece of the conversation that we're trying to ensure before building permitting.
Okay.
Yeah. So we can skip that one.
Okay.
In short. MBTA communities update was shortly one we submitted to the state and hope for a favorable review and approval in the next 3 months or so. So as we all are probably likely aware, town meeting passed Article 17 for the downtown and AAD expansion. So we submitted that and the necessary materials just early last week. So again, hopeful for some favorable review and letter of approval in the coming weeks. The other piece I wanted to discuss and
So when we talk about approval, right, are there two separate approvals, right? Because there's approval like any other zoning bylaw that goes through approval of the AG's office, right? And then there's this approval through the whatever, it used to be EOHED, but I know they have a different name now, right? Of whether it complies with MBTA communities. Do we know, do those two things come at the same time or?
So the AG's review will likely come first. We submitted the Form 7 and all of the documentation to them. I believe their review period is 30 days from submittal. ELC, who we submitted to, is a lot more technical of a submission and many more attachments. They get a 90-day window. It's two separate, simultaneous reviews, but they are looking at different things. The AG looking at general 3A compliance and allowances, and ELC, the actual MBTA communities compliance metrics.
So, right, there's no indication that this would happen, but right after that 30-day review of the AG's, of their acceptance of the zoning change, then those are part of our zoning, even though, right, like it could occur that the I'm going to call them EOHED, but whoever they are, right, comes back and says, no, actually, this doesn't comply with MBTA communities. You need to do this or you need to do that.
So,
I don't expect that to happen, but right, because there's these two-phase things.
Yeah, good question.
But so just wanted to understand that.
Great.
I have a question on the email that Olivia sent out. On the board of MBTA communities, it continues to say a pattern book has been drafted by our Innis associates and will help to facilitate development patterns encouraged through 3A. Who is Innis? Who's developing the patterns?
So that was the second piece of the update. We've had some technical difficulties with the shared point link or whatever it is they were delivering to us to look at the pattern book template, and that was part of this discussion tonight. But Innis is the architectural design consultant we contracted under a nearly $100,000 grant award. We worked with RKG Associates, who is a land use GIS mapping firm that dealt with more of the technical components of 3A compliance and model metrics. And its design is a zoning land use firm, but more on the architectural side and zoning policy in terms of land use regulations. So very early on, we had the idea at the first concept of a pattern book, really when we were looking at some of those 3 or 4 unit developments and saying, like, here's what we might generally expect on different lot sizes, X, Y, and Z. Obviously, we pivoted away from that concept, but under the grant work, we kind of kept it tucked away of, if we need this, if we want to pursue this, we still can under the grant funds. And that was the question tonight, if I could have gotten the template to you guys, that we've been building a working framework of what a pattern book could look like, and ultimately its purpose to serve in the town, which is to take our design guidelines, now that we focused on the downtown district. So for example, if we focus on the downtown district in this first piece of it, we can take our design guidelines and bring them more to the visual side and less so the jargony, word heavy book that it is now. And that way the board, a developer or applicant, and the public all kind of have the same visuals guidelines that we're working on, rather than going line by line in our decisions of, and we would do both at first, but every section and subsection of the design guidelines, and does it comply with this, does it comply with that, what's the process here, that we could take those to the next step and ultimately hopefully end up with a better tool for everybody to understand what the development is being based off of. And simultaneously, it could be a tool that we expand to other geographies like Main Street, like accessory dwelling units and apartments and so on, and build this framework of visually what are the historic elements, what are design elements and things that we would like to see in development going forward. And I'll try to share on the screen here the closest example I could
What
find.
does all that mean in the context of 3A, where the state has the latitude to do as it sees fit?
So it comes back down to the plan review process that still falls within Cpdc for these developments, and design guidelines are allowed as the partner, and we have design guidelines. It's just, should we look at a different way of doing them?
Does allowed mean we can mandate, or does allowed mean we can suggest?
You can suggest design alternatives.
Yeah, so John, so a little bit more background, right? 4A, right, which is general zoning in Massachusetts, doesn't allow, this is important for you, John, too, does not allow to have design guidelines, right? We have words, we have setbacks, step backs, right? Like sort of all the parameters, but we can't have any sort of design guidelines or suggestions. Yeah. When 40B came along, Smart Growth District, right? When they came along, they allowed us to have design guidelines. And so that's a better tool where we can say, no, you're not in compliance with these design guidelines, right? And you need to be, right? Where in typical zoning, they design what they want. We can cajole them into doing something different, but we really don't have, that cajoling doesn't have any meat behind it, wherein the Smart Growth District, it does.
Right. And just to make sure you can't necessarily require New England brick style, but in the design guidelines, you write to mimic that and reflect that's a potential option, that if you come in, right, the pathway and the partnership is going to focus on that, so that we feel that that type of design, the massing aside, but those type of elements are a benefit to the development. And so you can't require peaked roof versus flat roof, brick versus clapboard, but they do give you a bit more leverage and type of discussion opportunity to say this is what we're looking for.
And when you don't do it, explain why.
Right.
Yeah. And so.
So the closest thing I could find at a quick example is almost the Boston ADU book, which maybe will come up soon. But
And
again,
while you're bringing that up, I guess my other question on this, right, on this approach is because it does have that a greater level of, I'm going to say, ability to be used as an enforcement tool. I'm not sure enforcement's the right word, but does it matter that it's not in words? Right, because then when we write a discussion, right, if we're looking at a picture, like, right, three people can take different things from that picture. So that picture needs to, or that form, that graphic needs to at least articulate what it's trying to convey, right? So I'm just, I want us to be cautious that we're not throwing out that tool or weakening the tool that we had before.
So our intent in early discussions, and again, this is still early because we didn't want to push it too far without knowing that this might be a good tool, where we ended up was that we pull the design guideline language into this and just give it more visual form, but with still that required language and specific language. So this ADU kind of guidebook is almost like a template in terms of why a guidebook, how do you use it, and starting to give more visual elements to any type of application. And so this isn't akin just yet in its form, but it's starting to get there, and this is probably even far above and beyond what we'd be looking at, but starting to get at, like, as you look at smaller lots based on the zoning and the design guidelines, what might be appropriate scales, context, things of that nature.
So what you're thinking of doing, right? So the design guidelines that we have, right, were drafted by very good volunteers, right? But still was done, nights and weekends by some people on this board. And so what I'm seeing and what I think I hear you saying is this would be an opportunity to take that work, although very good, right, to just bring it to the next level and modify it as this board sees fit in the new context that from when those were last drafted, when 10 years ago?
Originated 10 years ago. We did some slight revisions or additions in 2020 based on that transitional zone, but we didn't necessarily change any meat and potatoes in it. So, but you can see it's very text heavy, right? Getting at 60% front facades and what that means. And there are some visuals and good visuals here. I don't know if Nick had necessarily designed those or not. But taking these and, like you said, just advancing them to the next level, giving them more of a form to them for people to use, and hopefully, again, just make the development and review process a little bit more advanced into the next steps. So, again, we could look at this beyond downtown and 3A, right? This could fit in ADUs. This could fit in like a South Main Street design guidelines that probably need to be updated despite not having those zoning changes given the development that we're seeing down there. So how we can take it and use it more holistically was the original intent, but ultimately, like, we want to make sure it works for you guys, that we are driving in the right direction. And if we want to pivot to something else, we can. But
I have a vivid memory of some of those negotiations when these guidelines were developed, and it had a lot of public input. And like all public input, it starts pretty broad, and then you eventually get some consensus on a few ideas. Is there a thought to try to start where we left? I assume it's to start where we left off, maybe try to re-engage the public and introduce some new material. Is that the thought? It's not a whole-scale redo.
no, it's not a whole scale redo. It's take what's there, give that extra context to it, and yes, we want to work with you guys as it builds out the historic committee and the public alike, and how we can factor all those comments into it.
I like that. I do like starting, just redoing the downtown smart growth design guidelines, and seeing where we go from there. And I maybe it is appropriate to expand it to, you know, accessory dwelling units when we pick up that conversation. That might be a good tool to. It'll have a different ability to be incorporated, but it might help that discussion
Yeah.
if we can do that as well. So
Okay, I'll solve the technical difficulties and get you guys the framework sooner than later, just so you can scroll through and see how its intended design and use is potentially flushing out, and we can take it from there. And if there's any, hey, what are we doing here? You know, we can press that button.
Yeah.
So,
sure.
right. Any other 3A questions before I move on? Right. I think next was the Eastern Gateway. So we've briefly brought it up at previous meetings on the Eastern Gateway District, which is really a strong portion of the existing industrial zone district down off of Walker's Brook Drive and Ash Street, and even Washington Street at the top. We've started to formalize that and build it out a bit more. What we have this week is the public kickoff, working with our consultants, Form in Place, who have subs of TEC for engineering and JM Goldson for public engagement. So we have finalized the steering committee we had previously discussed. Based on your input, we did expand that a bit more. So we have the 3 board members, one from Cpdc, one from FinCom, one from Climate, and now we have an additional 5 residents, general residents on that committee to help steward and shepherd the goals and process, and make sure we're hitting all of the right pieces and asking the right questions. So this public kickoff is really intended with the goal to just raise some project awareness, right? Get the word out there that people might want to start thinking about this and what the ultimate end goal and deliverables are, which is potential zoning recommendations, or based on what we find, other next steps to study. So the kickoff, we'll kind of go through some project history. We'll give some context examples from other communities that Form in Place has worked with, and how you kind of ultimately run the process of what's almost a district-wide plan. So there are a few key parcels kind of tucked away on the other side of Walker's Brook, but the overall intent again is to get the community involved. Let's start getting some building blocks of vision, goals, priorities based around different areas and elements, and that the steering committee, town staff, and the consultant can take and start delving into it a bit deeper, right? And ultimately, there's a lot of questions in this entire district and a lot to look at, because the potential is there for many different things, whether that's retail destination, if that's what you want to call it, like a Linfield marketplace akin, whether that's housing and other development opportunities for mixed use, almost similar to downtown, or whether that's manufacturing and job growth and things of that nature, the biotech, life sciences, or things of that nature. we need more than probably just qualitative feelings and input on that. And so what we're also looking at is the potential, I think a lot of that can come down to fiscal impact, right? And what that means long-term wise fiscally, not just new growth, but long-term tax base. So we're actively exploring too, if we can contract to do a market study on different land use alternatives and how that can also inform the process and ultimate choice that the town may or may not make for this district and what you want to promote in it. So that was kind of it in a nutshell. Just obviously, if this is intended to come with some sort of zoning look and land use considerations, we want to keep you guys up to speed throughout the process, and we'll be looking to do that.
Maybe one question.
Yep.
When I served on the board, one of the areas that caught our eye was the properties that are to the southeast of Fran Corporation and the DPW on the south. We couldn't tell if they were wetlands, and none of these ideas ever moved forward, but Reading has in its bylaws language that covers hotels. Unfortunately, we don't have any hotels in town, and in order to put that up, you'd need suitable open land. Have we ever looked at, or is it even feasible to look at? Again, I'm looking at the little cardboard mailer that you put out, but I'm also on Google Maps. It's to the southeast of Fran, and on the other side of the railroad tracks. I guess I'm not sure what that is.
I think that is, there's the gas station and dental, Perico Dental down there. I think there's something else tucked back.
It's behind the filling station, and there's a small business. Business entity. I suppose the property line is actually to the west of 128, right? The actual Reading Woodfield property line. I believe you're right. But that's still probably big enough to entertain I just don't know who owns that property. Is that private property?
Good question. I think that's the Boston Gas. I think that's National Grid that actually owns that, and admittedly, I'm blanking what they do with it.
It'd be worth getting answers to it, because it's about the only, it's convenient, it's close to 128. If it could ever be developed, a hotel put in, that's where you would put it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the limits of our scope right now, and I can go back to the consultant and see if we can expand it. But let me see if I can find a good context.
I'm not trying to expand, I'm just trying to define it at the moment. I'm not suggesting we do anything, just find out what truth is.
Yep. So the general area we were looking at was priority of this blue border here. These buildings are the 55 Walkersbrook and the medical facility.
Right, yeah.
And here's the
I'm talking about the
southwest
corner of that blue line.
So
that thing there is a gas company, that driveway right
that's
there.
The gas
I'm
company.
talking the southern portion of that.
Yeah, this is predominantly wet.
And then on the other side of the railroad tracks did what's going on there.
Yep, majority wet over here. Frayne owns a decent chunk of this.
Okay.
But ultimately, if we really wanted to look at this more, we could include these buildings in some of these down Walkersbrook, but we kind of had already scope creeped a little bit with adding some more parcels. But that doesn't mean that those are the definitive lines. If the community says, why wouldn't we look at this whole area, right? So this is kind of the general intent of the district that we're looking at, but happy for feedback on that from you guys and the community. And I'll say, right, obviously the number one question we get is, how are you looking at and drawing over private land? And again, the intent is really to start establishing connection improvements and land use considerations, both scaling and use-wise. By scale, I mean mass, right? How big are the buildings that we'd be looking at, 1, 2, 3, 4 story, etc. And more deriving towards how it can shape a zoning policy more so than like shape an actual development itself. So,
Well, I think that meeting is Wednesday.
Yep.
Wednesday night. It would be obviously a good idea to have a map that shows what the ground area is that we're dealing with.
yeah.
And since this is it's Commonwealth money, right? Some of it, the grant,
It is grant-based, yep.
so it's gotta be within their scope.
Yep. So that is the other limiting factor, right? Because it was written specifically for some priority development areas that generally look to expand slightly on the edges, but the development areas where RML were in purple, they're the Market Basket General Way site and on the other side of the tracks. So that was it on that one. If there's no other questions. Just looking at my agenda here. 2025 meeting schedule, we did put in the drive. Obviously, first meeting now being January 13th. Fairly standard meeting agenda, I think, sticking to the second Mondays for most months, besides where a holiday factored in or town meeting. But just wanted to get it to you guys in advance so that you have those weeks to plug in. Cpdc reorganization thoughts. I believe when we had last gone through this, John, you had mentioned through New Year to get us through the MBTA communities practice, which we have now done. So come January, with a bit more discussion, just wanted to flag it for you guys now that potentially you'd be electing a new chair and or vice chair. And whether that's for a 6-month period to get through July or a 1.5 years to get to next July, whatever you guys decide is okay with us. So just wanted to flag that one. Pause, make sure there's no.
So that should be, that, making a statement here, that should be on the agenda next month.
Yeah. Another general updates is we're plugging along with the net zero action plan. That's pretty close to concluding. Same can be said for the arts and culture master plan, which is mostly strategies and recommendations around supporting cultural placemaking activity. And there was considerations in that of, you know, what is a cultural center, right? And as the town looks at the recalc and senior and community center, what's arts center related in that, and how does the town look at that? And so we've been working with some focus groups of artists like Quantipower players and visual artists and other to understand generally what the limitations in the regions are and what's not here. And, you know, if one day Reading could look to improve their arts and culture based facilities. So we have a good handful of performance theaters in the district, in Stoneham and Reading and other. What we seem to hear is lack of gallery space and visual art opportunity or public art and structural public art beyond just the mural. So we're getting a lot of that feedback and seeing what we can look at locally to expand on that. So that plan process is wrapping up in January. And there's a boatload of other projects and grants and things, but
So, right, not to just move on to the next thing, but right, so typically, right, we, and I don't remember whether we do this on a calendar year or a board or organization year, but usually come up with, you know, a set of priorities, you know, beyond, you know, design review. We're obviously in a slow period in terms of design review right now. And I know that we pushed off any big projects because we just had one, right? But I don't know whether, I mean, certainly what we just talked about with the Eastern Gateway, that's you know, a sizable effort, and I don't want to diminish, you know, take away from that, but just wondering if you guys or anyone on the board had anything that we think that we ought to be focusing on, either from a zoning amendment standpoint, or from a general planning standpoint.
Right.
You know, right, we've pushed off the master plan, right? There's a discussion about a master plan, right? We had talked about, and this may be news for John, but what we had talked about in the past is that, right, back in now, 10 years ago, maybe more,
Or, yeah.
right? Right, we did a whole master plan
Mhm.
effort all at once. We, at this point, as Andrew just said, like, we're doing lots of components of a master plan, not just all once, and
Mhm.
maybe, I think the last discussion, I think with, when Julie was here, was, well, let's see what we have, all the pieces, and
Right.
figure out what we're missing, and then
Mhm.
maybe an effort to wrap them all together and create a master plan out of
Yeah.
the pieces. And then I know we have the ADU thing coming up, so I'm putting it out there on, what are our thoughts, and what, I don't feel compelled to move on to something else, but I wouldn't be surprised if through the spring, we
Mhm.
have more agendas like this.
Agreed. And I actually was about to echo similar that come January in the new year, we want to start thinking about some priorities and the work that we can work on together. I know, right, like administratively, accessory apartments might naturally come to the top. You don't need to change your bylaw, but it's probably good practice to look at it based on the new state law. And floodplain too, that we had pushed off, I think 2022, that we want to make sure we're in compliance with the model bylaw and the state needs there. So especially if we're looking at that Eastern Gateway District. So those are two just kind of administratively from the state that almost bubble up to the top, but there are other considerations too from what we've heard in the public and other things just in the bylaw or general practice we can look at too. So we're gonna start to set the stage for that in January, and then, right, whether it's priorities with you guys or go towards like what we used to do as the zoning workshop and kind of community-wide priority setting, we could look at. And then alternatively too, right, we had the town meeting funds from MBTA communities that was more about looking at potential studies, impacts planning. Ultimately, as we focus downtown, we didn't use a substantial piece of that, and it almost felt like it could be seed money for something like a master plan or vision plan for the town. Because that seemed to get at the intensive town meeting. We'd have to go back there for that and maybe additional funding, but we were going to plant that seed as well, that if we really wanted to push that, we might already have what could be considered almost like seed funding for it. So just all preliminary thoughts that we've been kind of exploring.
John, Tom?
I have a hard stop here in 5
All right.
minutes. When I leave you, or a bit longer, you're gonna lose quorum. So I don't know if you want to go to the minutes.
Sounds like a
Happy
plan.
to do so.
Yes. Let's see, we've got the November 4th and
Number 7.
October 7th.
Which I believe if Olivia pulls up, Hillary gave us one comment on the October meeting.
Let's do mine, but it's probably. Let's see.
Focused on October 1st? And October 7th first?
October 7th, yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Her.
I have no changes.
Sorry, I was just gonna mention Hillary's comment was on the bottom of page 3. I believe it said variation in clapping, and then I just changed it to siding because I think there was
Oh, yeah.
some confusion there.
Clapboard and siding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mix the two together.
I did not have any comments.
November 4th.
Well, I'll move that we adopt the minutes for October 7, 2024.
Second?
All right, roll call on that. John?
Yes.
John, yes. Tom?
Yes.
I have one edit. I don't believe I attended this meeting, but I'm not shown as not present.
Oh, good one, Josh. That was November?
It could be proven wrong. Let me go back and check. I just am not shown here in one form or another.
I think so.
I want to say.
The 346, 348, that's the real estate office today, right?
Correct.
I do remember that, so now I'm really confused. I remember that discussion, actually, because my name would appear anywhere here.
Yeah, no, I'm looking at the votes. I don't see it.
Yeah, and I wasn't there.
Yeah, it may have been the October meeting that's jogging your memory.
Yeah,
That was
because that one's
discussed
been
then.
here twice.
Okay. I would just put me as not present, and I'll abstain on the vote. I guess you can't, because you won't.
Yeah, you can still vote if you weren't there. That is a good note that if we need to forward you a Mullen form and recording for Main Street, we'll do so.
I was for the October meeting, so I'm fully up to speed on the issues. But anyway,
I do not have any
None.
issues there. Make a motion to approve the meeting minutes from November 4th, 2024.
I'll second.
All right. Roll call vote. John?
yes,
John, yes. Tom?
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
And I think that does it. And we've got 4 minutes left, right, John? All right.
all right, thank you all. Have a
All
good
right.
evening.
Thank
Another
you.
motion to adjourn.
I'll move.
All right. All those in favor?
Second,
All right.
Aye.
Aye.
goodbye, good
All
night.
right.
Thank
Good
you,
night.
everybody.
Thanks, John.
Nice. Here we go.
First meeting I've ever